Lando Norris is the reigning Formula One world champion. McLaren won back-to-back Constructors titles. They were supposed to be the team to beat in 2026. And yet, through 7 races, Norris sits 6th in the championship, 98 points behind the leader, and his own team principal just stood in front of the media and admitted that being a customer team is now a disadvantage. Nobody's saying it loudly yet, but the signs have been there for months. Here's why McLaren's golden era may already be ending faster than anyone wants to admit. At the end of 2025, McLaren looked untouchable. Norris had his first Drivers' Championship. The team had back-to-back Constructors titles. Oscar Piastri was emerging as a future world champion in his own right. The McL39 was the fastest car on the grid more often than not. If you'd told an F1 fan 12 months ago that McLaren would enter 2026 as the sport's dominant force, nobody would have blinked. But dominant teams in Formula One have a habit of falling apart quietly before they fall apart publicly. And right now, beneath the press releases and the papaya livery, there are at least 3 structural problems eating away at McLaren's foundation. Problems that don't show up in a single race result, but that compound race by race, decision by decision, until suddenly the gap feels impossible to close. Let's go back to the second half of 2025, because that's where this story really starts. McLaren entered the year dominant. They were so far ahead in the early rounds that rival teams, including Ferrari, made the decision to effectively write off 2025 and redirect their resources toward 2026. McLaren made a similar call. After bringing a significant upgrade package to the British Grand Prix at round 12, team principal Andrea Stella confirmed they shut down development on the McL39 entirely and redirected the whole factory toward the 2026 car. The logic was sound in theory. They had the points buffer, the Constructors' title was mathematically theirs, and the 2026 regulations were a full reset. Better to win the future than squeeze the last tenth out of the present. But here's what happened next. Red Bull didn't stop. Mercedes didn't stop. They kept bringing upgrades through Monza, Baku, and Singapore. The field closed in. Verstappen launched a stunning second-half comeback, overturning a 104-point deficit to Piastri to finish just 11 points off Norris by the end of the year. McLaren held on, but only just. And Stella later admitted the obvious. The team had been caught on outright performance after switching off its development too early. Now carry that forward. McLaren enters 2026 with fewer aerodynamic testing restrictions hours than any other team, because they won the championship. They arrive into a full regulation reset with the smallest wind tunnel allocation, the tightest development budget per rulebook, and a car that by the end of 2025 was no longer clearly the fastest on the grid. That's not the foundation of a dynasty. That's a team standing at the edge of a cliff, hoping the ground holds. And then the 2026 season began, and a completely different problem emerged. One that's arguably more dangerous than a development freeze, because it's structural, and there's no quick fix. McLaren uses Mercedes power units. They have done since 2021, and it has been one of the great partnerships in recent F1 history. The Mercedes engine was competitive, reliable, and well integrated into McLaren's chassis. Stella used to say, almost routinely, that being a customer team had never put McLaren on the back foot. He can't say that anymore. At the Australian Grand Prix, McLaren qualified 0.8 seconds off pole that went to George Russell in the works Mercedes. In China, they suffered a double DNS, their first in over 2 decades. In Canada, Norris retired with a gearbox failure. In Monaco, he dropped out with a power unit problem. He is already on his 3rd power unit and 3rd battery of the season, and the team has warned that grid penalties are coming unless something changes. What's happened is specific to the 2026 regulation change. The new power units are completely different pieces of machinery, far more complex than anything that came before, with a new hybrid architecture that places enormous performance value on how the system is operated. Works teams figure this out first because they built the engine. They have every data point. Customer teams like McLaren get the same hardware as the rules require, but not the operating knowledge. Stella was direct about it. The flow of information from Mercedes' HEP had not been as anticipated. McLaren was arriving at sessions, running the car, looking at the data, and reacting. That's not how you develop an F1 car. That's how you fall behind, and the gap is already visible in the standings. Kimi Antonelli leads the championship with 156 points. Lando Norris, the defending world champion, has 58. Now let's talk about the human element in all of this, because it matters more than the technical picture might suggest. Norris won his world championship in 2025 in a McLaren that was, at its best, the fastest car on the grid. He was brilliant, don't misread this, but he was also competing in a period where his machinery gave him a genuine advantage. That's not a criticism, that's Formula One. The car matters. In 2026, his car is not the fastest. It's not even close to the fastest. Antonelli has won 5 consecutive races. The Mercedes is dominant in the way that McLaren was dominant 2 years ago, and Norris, who has struggled in the past with the psychological weight of expectation, is now being asked to defend a world title with a car that's unreliable, a power unit whose behaviour he openly admits he can't predict, and a points gap that is already very difficult to close. After Monaco, he didn't hide his frustration. He admitted he no longer knows what to expect each race weekend. That's a dangerous place for any driver to be, but especially one whose confidence has always been closely tied to his trust in the machinery. When the car is right, Norris is brilliant. When it isn't, the doubts can creep in fast. And there's a further wrinkle. Piastri sits 5th in the championship with 60 points, 2 points more than Norris. McLaren's second driver is actually ahead of their world champion, because Piastri has been finishing races that Norris has been retiring from. That's not a crisis yet, but it is a dynamic that could get complicated very quickly if McLaren has to start making resource decisions about who to support. Here's the uncomfortable truth that sits underneath everything else. None of McLaren's 2026 problems have short-term solutions. The development freeze hurt, but teams catch up from development gaps. The engine integration issue is different. Stella has acknowledged that McLaren and Mercedes need to fundamentally restructure how they collaborate, not patch individual reliability failures, but rebuild the entire information sharing framework between the two organisations. He said those conversations had already been ongoing for months before the season started. And still, 5 DNFs in 7 races. The deeper structural issue is this. McLaren is a customer team in an era when being a customer has never mattered more. When engines were relatively simple and well understood, the difference between a works operation and a customer was manageable. With the 2026 power units, the gap is large, because so much performance lives in the operating strategy, not just the hardware. And no rule forces Mercedes to share that knowledge with McLaren. Zak Brown has acknowledged, in principle, an openness to developing their own power unit in the long term, as Red Bull did with Ford. But that's a 5 to 7 year project. It doesn't help Norris in Spain this weekend. The only path back into the 2026 championship requires Mercedes EP to dramatically accelerate their information sharing, reliability to improve significantly and quickly, and Norris to start banking big points before the deficit becomes mathematically impossible. 3 things need to go right simultaneously. And in Formula One, when one thing goes wrong, it almost always brings 2 more with it. McLaren won 2 Constructors' titles and a Drivers' Championship back-to-back. That is genuinely remarkable, and nothing that happens in 2026 takes that away. But Formula One doesn't reward the past. It rewards whoever solves the present problem fastest. Right now, McLaren's problems are stacking up faster than they're being solved. The window to defend is still technically open. But it's closing, quietly, race by race, and by the time the paddock starts saying it out loud, it may already be too late. So here's the question. Do you think McLaren can still turn this around in 2026? Or has the Mercedes-powered era already run its course? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want analysis like this, the Stories F1 Media isn't quite ready to say yet. Subscribe. We'll be here.